Okay, well, let's get started. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Tim Constant. I am an instructional coach for Clarenceville School District, which is in Livonia, Michigan. And this is Exploratory Classroom. This is about exploration. And so I'm really excited that you are here. And one of the things that I want to do is I want to start out right away with just having some conversations, either in the chat or if you feel like unmuting yourself. What I'm going to do is I have put together a Google Drive folder with a lot of resources for you. And so I'm going to start with putting the link to that Google Drive folder for you in the chat. And so we're going to be looking at a variety of different sources about an exploratory classroom and what does that mean. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to start out with a brainstorm. And so there's a lot of other sessions that are going on, but you chose this session and I'm so excited that you're here. So I've created a Jamboard and I'm going to put that link into the chat. And what I would like for you to do is tell me, what do you want to learn from this session? What are some curiosities? What are some wonderings, right? So the title of this session is the Exploratory Classroom. All right, so I'll give you a few minutes to add your thoughts. If you're just coming in, I put a link to a Jamboard, and we're doing just kind of a brainstorm here of what do you want to learn from this session? What are some curiosities? What are some wonderings, right? This is the Exploratory Classroom. And also, if you came in just a little bit late, I also, at the beginning, put in a link to a Google Drive folder of some resources. So I'm going to put that into the chat as well for you. So I'm seeing some things that I'm wondering, what is it? What it would look like in a second grade level. Excellent wondering and question. Wondering what quote unquote exploratory classroom is, and any tips and suggestions for making learning exciting for students. Fantastic. How do these 6 competencies connect with things like PBL, 21st century skills, etc.? Wonderful question. Wondering how we can be creative and flexible with learning while still tying coursework to standards. Excellent, excellent. Simple to employ with the C3 framework activities. Great. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that. Definitely. And so we're going to brainstorm about some ideas of how this exploratory classroom, or what I refer to as deep learning, how that helps to support the C3 framework and vice versa. So excellent. These are just great wonderings, great questions, and this helps me to kind of customize this session for you. So this is great. So great, wonderful. So I want to start with talking about, if you were in the panel discussion right before this session, I want to talk about some things that came up probably towards the end of the panel discussion, because I think it's a good lead in to some of your questions and some of your wonderings here. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, and so we're talking about what is this? What do we mean by an exploratory classroom, right? So here's the agenda. This is what the agenda is. There really isn't an agenda. If there was an agenda, it wouldn't be exploratory, right? So we're going to see where our collaboration, where our conversation takes us, right? But what's interesting is I love words, right? And so in preparing for our collaboration and our conversation, I wanted to know really kind of what the origins of the word agenda means, right? Because you always see that there's an agenda to every meeting or session or workshop, right? And so it originated in the 1650s, right? And it's from the Latin word agenda, which means things to be done, right? So when you think about things to be done, that's not very exploratory, right? It's like a list, a checklist that we have to do this, and we have to do this. We got to get all of these things done, right? And so I want you to think about that in relation to something that came up in the panel discussion and I thought was really fascinating. And there was this conversation about rigor, right? There was a really good discussion and conversation about rigor. And if you look at the cover of the C3 Social Studies Framework, at the very bottom is the term rigor, guidance for enhancing rigor, right? In K through 12 civics, economics, geography, and history. Right? So this word rigor is used so much, so often, in addition to this term of rigor and relevance, right? Making things rigorous, making things relevant, right? So I want you to think about something. I'm going to challenge you and challenge this word of rigor. I don't want us to think about rigor, right? So I want to introduce you to Barry Lane. This is Barry Lane, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Barry Lane, but Barry Lane is, I think, one of the most brilliant minds in education that a lot of people don't know his name or know of him. But I was very fortunate quite a number of years ago, early in my education career, of taking a full day workshop from Barry Lane. And he teaches writing and he's a storyteller. And he did a whole day of talking about rigor. And he actually has a TED Talk, and you can YouTube Barry Lane and find that TED Talk. And one of the things I thought was fascinating, and this relates to the exploratory classroom, is he looked up various definitions of rigor. And I think you're going to be shocked. Strictness or severity. A cruel act. A harsh or trying circumstance. Shivering or trembling. Now we're going to get into some medical terminology. A state of rigidity in living tissues or organs that prevents response to stimuli. Wow. And this one's one of my favorites. A state of rigidity assumed by some animals in reaction to sudden shock. What? Right. So when we talk about rigor, he makes this incredible argument that just based on these definitions and these various definitions, that's not, we don't want this, right? What we want is vigor and relevance, right? We want vigor, not rigor. Because vigor, look at these definitions: good health, energy, enthusiasm, this mental strength, this balance, intensity of action, this mental energy, this strength of thought, opinion, and expression. So I share this with you because this is what an exploratory classroom does. It creates this vigor, right? And those in education that are amazing at exploratory classrooms, we're gonna brainstorm what a definition of this would be, is early childhood educators, right? And in elementary. And then somehow, some reason, as students are migrating into later grades, we tend to lose this vigor, right? And focus more on rigor, right? And we forget to play, we forget to explore, to take risks, right? So, you know, I share that with you, and I think that it's such an incredible argument and thought that Barry Lane presents. And it leads into talking about what is an exploratory classroom, or what's also referred to as deep learning. So I want to pause right there and just get what your thoughts are about that, about rigor versus vigor. And please feel free to unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat as well, but it'd be wonderful to be able for you to unmute, and so we can hear what your thoughts are about it. No thoughts? Do you agree or disagree with this idea of not focusing on rigor, but focusing on vigor?
Hey, Tim.
Yes, Tom.
It's Tom Hinken. So sorry, I'm getting to a place where I can turn things on.
Okay.
Not surrounded by family. Not that they don't want to be at the social studies conference with us, but so when I think about vigor, when I think back to middle school, right? What are the days that my kids loved being in the classroom and I loved being in the classroom? It was those times we were playful, right? When we were doing the genius hour, or when we were enjoying what we were doing. And I mean, those are the days I loved in the room. But yeah, I just always struggled with, how do you do that in a way that you're still covering, right, the right standards, and you're still doing that? I guess that's kind of where I'm hanging out right now.
Yeah, and that's a huge question, and so let's explore that, Tom. That's a really great thought, because that's always on the forefront of everyone's mind, right? I would love to do more of this, right? More exploration, right? Mm-hmm. Some things that's more dynamic, but we have these standards. So we got these pacing guides. We have to do these things, right? So let's explore that thought. I'm really glad that you mentioned that. So let's talk about what is an exploratory classroom, right? So this is an incredible resource that I highly recommend that you get as part of your library. This dive into deep learning, tools for engagement. Now, this is from research that actually started in Australia and New Zealand, and then it's expanded into Canada, and now it's really expanding into the United States. And there are some districts here in Michigan that have really taken the lead in this idea of an exploratory classroom, but from this philosophy of deep learning and this framework of deep learning. And I'm going to share that framework with you. And Tom, I think that when you see this and others see this, there will be some aha moments, some things of, oh, okay, I see and how I might be able to cover a lot of ground, right? A lot of things, a lot of standards, right? A lot of things that I have to cover in a short period of time, right? So this is, when I'm talking about deep learning, it's from this resource, right? So there is a site called New Pedagogies for Deep Learning, a global partnership. And this idea of deep learning is some of the school districts that have really taken the lead in this is Troy School District has been working with this for years and is doing some really amazing things. I'm going to show you a video of an example of deep learning here in a minute. We're going to unpack that video and get what your observations are of what deep learning is, which is an exploratory classroom, right? Rochester Community Schools here in Michigan is also one that is really taking the lead in this idea of deep learning as an exploratory classroom. And so my district, Clarenceville School District, we're trying to be a leader in this as well. And we have two district initiatives this school year. One is social emotional learning. And we have a specific tool that we're using to address social emotional learning. And the second one is deep learning, this idea of this exploratory classroom, right? And that's K through 12. So what I want to do is I'm going to show you a video of deep learning from Troy School District, all right? And when I show you this, I want you to think of three things. I want you to, when you see this video, I want you to think about what's deep about this learning. What are some of the attributes that you see from the learning that is in this video that we would refer to as deep learning? Okay. What's changing for students? Right? How is this different? What is changing for students? And then what is changing for teachers? I think that's a really interesting question. Okay. So I want you to think about that. What's deep? What are the attributes? What's changing for students? And what's changing for teachers? Okay. So let me get to our video.
We feel glorious, glorious. We can make a difference. We know Project Root is the...
We started with a question, and the question was, how can we help those who have little to no access to healthy foods?
The marketing and fundraising team went together and they figured out the name Project Root. R stands for reaching others. The first O stands for opportunities. Second O stands for organic foods. The fourth letter T stands for together.
So we decided to go as a partnership for our first grade and fifth grade buddies.
I learned so many things through math, science, social studies, writing, reading, all the subjects. So many people are hungry, and actually 48.8 million people are in hunger.
We really just thought, well, if we make a school garden, then we could donate those foods. But then we thought,
we obviously can't take care of a garden when like Mother Nature is giving snow.
So we thought making a greenhouse is the best option to help the world.
The food, well, once they're ready and ripe, we'll give it to charities.
Such as food drives, Forgotten Harvest, UNICEF.
We still have the question of how do we raise money. We need experts to help us. So that's why we call them Master Gardeners.
So we thought if we kind of lock arms together with other businesses that are garden businesses, then that would kind of help us make the best greenhouse for all the kids to learn.
We feel glorious, glorious.
we can make a difference. No matter how young or how old you are, you can still make an impact to the world.
All right, so that is just one example of deep learning. So what are some attributes that you saw?
So I noticed, oh, sorry, Steve.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I just jump in.
You're in.
So I noticed that they took something that the students were interested in. They didn't say, this is what we're teaching about. They seem to have that interest themselves. And they kind of ran with that.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so this was student driven, right? They looked at a student's interest, right? And then built something from the student interest, right? That was kind of the foundation, the core, right, of the lesson. Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. Steve, you had a thought here
Yes.
of attributes. What's deep?
Well, real world learning, real world activities with science mixed in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and one of those students had mentioned about that there's writing, there's right ELA, there's social studies involved in there, some math, right?
Yep.
So excellent.
Local to global.
Mm-hmm. Global, right? That's a key word, right? And you'll see why here when I get into showing you this framework of deep learning.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great.
I'd like to also add problem solving too. The students realized that, you know, in order to make this garden, they had to come up with a solution to make it, you know, happen, which is to build a greenhouse. And of course, how can they achieve their goal? Putting together fundraisers and talking to those master gardeners to give them tips and clues.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, great. Yeah, problem solving and doing outreach right into the community, forming partnerships, right? So excellent. Thank you, Heather. So what's changing for the students?
I'm going to say it's what's changing for them is the fact that they're looking at it at an issue, which is talking about hunger, which is not just a community issue or a state issue, it's a global issue. And so they're looking at the big picture. And I mean, already, I mean, a lot of those kids, the way they were presenting and talking about this whole project, this endeavor, they really seem to understand the importance behind it and what they can do to help out, especially, you know, donating to various different charities.
Mm-hmm. Great, excellent. Stephen, you were going to say something.
Yes. They're out of the classroom, beyond the textbook, and learning skills that from the fifth graders, which I'm sure at Troy they have some exceptional skills. They know how to collaborate. They also likely have strong relationships within their families and beyond, which gives them a little bit of a leg up. However, the way you're sharing it here and demonstrating, I'm sure it could be copied in other areas. And I might add that the art, the music, the singing was very nice too. That's a way of spreading the gospel, so to speak. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to build off real fast, and I'm sorry for the background noise here. On that fifth and second grade or fifth and the different age group level, they're learning so much more about social emotional skills. Like the younger students have someone to look up to, and that's teaching them and guiding them. But those fifth graders are learning how to be the leaders, which is something that a lot of times they may not have had a chance to be a leader.
Yeah.
So
wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. These are great observations. And lastly, what's changing for teachers?
I think it's just the change of not being tied to the curriculum and just repeating what the books are telling you to repeat. And this is how you say this. I mean, even our writing now is say exactly this. So it gives them more freedoms to help the students where they need the help.
I think I see kids that are like really engaged. And the kids are asking for the learning, right? Because they need to learn things to carry out this project. So it's no longer the teacher saying you need to learn this. The kids are like, how do we do this? And then the teachers can fill that for them. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's the reason why I had started with the Jamboard, right? Is I wanted to find out, what are your curiosities, right? What do you want to learn, right? So anytime that I do a workshop or a presentation, I have a basic idea of like what I want to talk about, and I've got some slides and so forth, but I can't tell you and how often I don't use certain slides because a conversation or collaboration goes in a certain direction, right? So I've got a basic idea of what I want to share with you and what I want to talk about, right? But there's a very flexible, constructivist approach to it. And that's why I started out with the Jamboard, right? Is you joined this session over other sessions because you had some curiosities, you had some wonderings, you were possibly looking for something, right? And so I wanted to find out what you are looking for, what you want to learn, right? And then I was immediately, as you were putting Post-it notes on the Jamboard, I was immediately thinking, okay, this is where I want to go with our time together. So excellent. So I'm hoping that you're starting to think about how this may fit in a social studies context here, right? So Tom, I'm going to get to now that's going to become clear here because I'm going to get back to, all right, how do I do this, right? Among all of these things that information that needs to be covered, right? So let's look at this framework, the big concept of deep learning, right? So it's around what's referred to these 6 C's or these 6 competencies. And I included in your Google Drive folder a handout of what the 6 C's are, and under each one of the C's is some bullet points that explains what those 6 C's are, right? We're going to go over those here in a minute. So whenever you're designing a lesson or a unit or an activity for your social studies class, right, or your social studies unit, you want to think about these 6 C's, but you also want to think about the pedagogical practices, the learning partnerships. Now, if you think about and reflect on that video, they reached out to master gardeners, right? Establishing partnerships to help in supporting that learning, right? What's the learning environment? How are they leveraging digital resources, right? So Stephen, I'm thinking about your wonderful workshop that you did earlier in the conference. Like, how would they leverage your amazing digital resources that you had presented, right? That's an important part of this exploratory deep learning concept, right? But the school, the district has to provide these conditions for this to be able to occur, right? For there to be the flexibility, for you to be able to be okay and comfortable with taking risks and exploring and handing the learning, the leading of the learning over to the students, right? So the school and the district has to create this. So Troy Schools, Rochester has done that. And now my school is learning, and we're talking with Troy in Rochester because they've been doing this and working on this for years now. How do we create these conditions? How do we create this environment for this to occur, and that it's safe and it's okay to explore and take risks, right? So I had mentioned that there's a handout in your Google Drive folder of these 6 competencies, right? Which is character, citizenship, collaboration, which is the focus of the conference, right? The theme of the conference, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. Okay? That's your 6 C's. So the theme of the conference is focused on collaboration, right? So I wanna focus on that one and unpack that a little bit, all right? So in your Google Drive folder, I put in there, I didn't create it, but I put in there what is referred to as a learning progression, a deep learning progression. So there's a file in there that has these learning progressions for each one of the 6 C's. And those learning progressions are a guide for you as an educator to use in helping to design a lesson in the environment, focusing on these 6 C's. So this is what I do with my teachers that I work with, that I coach. I say, don't focus on all 6 C's. Focus on 1 C, a core competency. And then we looked at the learning progression. So I have up here right now, collaboration. And then I said, okay, within the learning progression, let's look at one dimension of, in this case, collaboration, right? Let's look at the language, right? So, for example, the very first dimension is working interdependently as a team. Okay? So if you look all the way to the right, if you look at the language for proficient, right? If a teacher had created a deep learning environment that's proficient for collaboration, learners demonstrate a highly effective and synergistic approach to work in a way that not only leverages each member's strengths, but provides opportunities. Okay, so let's unpack that. So one of the things that I'm working on with my teachers right now, because we're new to this exploratory deep learning, is to be able to do that, to focus on that. Members of the class need to understand their own strengths, right? So our teachers are designing some activities to be able to identify, what am I good at, right? What are my strengths, right? And then having conversations in their classes about what are their strengths. So the teachers are using these learning progressions, and they're just taking pieces of these learning progressions to be able to start building activities and lessons for deep learning. All right, so that's where we're starting. We're starting small. We're not trying to do something that covers all 6 core competencies, all 6 C's. We're looking at 1, right? And then within that 1, we're looking at the parts of that competency, and we're looking at the language, and we're developing these little mini tasks and lessons with students to address, in this case, collaboration. How do we improve student skills in collaborating with each other? So I'm going to pause right there and get what your thoughts are before I tie this into the C3 framework and the arc of inquiry, because that was something that somebody had mentioned on the Jamboard, right? Yes. So Stephen, you had mentioned it. Great. So Stephen, any thoughts about this? And it's going to take a while. I included this document of the learning progressions for all of the 6 C's for you to explore and look at in the Google Drive folder.
Yep. That's where I headed to. And so I digressed off your collaboration page, and there was multiple collaboration pages there too.
Yes.
And I was thinking about Vigor, if we can how can we also get vigor into some of these proficient activities and short and sweet moments, which sometimes take time in small group activities, and the highlight is the concert. So what are we doing at the practice level? How are we still finding vigor within the practice and working our way towards proficient? So that's what I was thinking, and of course tied into the presentation we did and how it can be built, and what you've presented here, how they can be blended.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things I want to think about, so Stephen, you had brought up on the Jamboard the inquiry arc, the C3, right? So let's talk about how this supports C3, if you develop IDMs, right? So how does this fit, right? So I think that most people have seen this, right? The 4 dimensions, right? And the different components, right? Of the 4 dimensions. And you saw on that video that the students, they started with a compelling question, right? They had a compelling question, right? They identified that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what deep learning does is something that's unique. It flips dimension 4, right? So it takes the idea of taking informed action and moves it up, right? So this is what I mean by this. And I want you to think about this. And this comes from the blueprinting book by Kathy Swan and S.G. Grant and John Lee, right? This is their newest publication, right? In this book, and I highly recommend that you get this, they have created unique, specialized IDM models. And one of the IDM models is an embedded action IDM. And look at the last one, student-centered, right? Very important. So the embedded action one, and I just happen to have the book right here, right? The embedded action one focuses on, instead of waiting to talk about how do we take informed action later on in the IDM, why don't we move that discussion and those ideas and embed it throughout the entire IDM, right? So and that's very student-centered, right? And you have the students lead that, right? So in the idea of deep learning is them constantly thinking about, what action can I take? I've got a compelling question to try to solve a problem. What action do I take, right? So for example, in the embedded IDM, you look at being informed, right? You look at how to be engaged, being a leader. How do we organize? What can we do? Do we do some kind of organizational movement, right? And how do we look at transformation? How is our work being transformational, right? So I think that, and that's what deep learning is, right? So deep learning, this exploratory classroom, does align really well with C3 if you use this you embed the action throughout your IDM and you make it student-centered, right? So that's where we're focusing on, and I want you to think about that as you're thinking about designing your lessons or your units, right? Is taking this approach, because this is an exploratory classroom. This is deep learning.
And one step further, Tim, to consistently get them to think like a historian, a geographer, economist, and multidisciplinary. And that's, I think they'll feel like adults. They'll see themselves doing adult actions in the world.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can just imagine the level of engagement increasing, right? Because it's very student-centered. It's increasing this engagement. They're really, really excited about learning, right? So I wanted to, it's 6:30, and I wanted to introduce you to this new thought process, this new idea, right? And please explore those resources in that Google Drive folder, because I shared another example of deep learning that's in another school. It's a vignette that I included in the Google Drive folder for you to read through, and think about those attributes. Think about what has changed for students. Think about what has changed for teachers. So everyone, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you being in this session, and I'm hoping that those resources will be helpful for you. Please reach out to me if you have any questions about any of those resources in that Google Drive folder, or if you want to talk more about deep learning in this exploratory classroom.
Well, thanks, Tim.
Yes, thank you, everyone.